Hi, guys, and welcome to this week's Indian Global Esports Conference panel. I am here with some very established members of the esports law community. And welcome to oh gosh, that is Global Esports Conference panel. I am here with some very hold on a second. Okay, there we go. I didn't even mute myself, so that was a nice echo, but we're going to be talking about esports agents and player representation today. I am Kelsey Ramage, Partnerships Manager over at Invent Global, and I would love to introduce my lovely panelists for today. So I'm going to start off with esports law, better known as Bryce Blum. So he is pretty much a huge icon in the esports law community. He's done millions of contract negotiations and set a precedent for, I think, a lot of them. He is the co-founder of ESG Law. Thank you so much for being here.
Yeah, thanks for having me. I don't know how I'm going to live up to that, but I will try.
I just got to hype you up, you know? And then next we have Fair Play Esports, Ryan Fairchild. He is an esports attorney over at Brooks Pierce. And so Brooks Pierce is actually a normal law firm. So I'm really excited to have his take on how to incorporate both esports and, standard law practices over there. So thank you so much for being here as well.
Happy to be here. And I have not done millions of contract negotiations like Bryce, but probably in the hundreds at this point. So.
We're trending up, Ryan.
Yeah.
No, you guys are all great. I just the hype. The hype is always there with you guys. I wouldn't have selected you for this panel unless I didn't have immense respect for all you guys. And next we have Marcel Feldkamp. He has repped hundreds of people throughout the years, and also has been a pro esports player as well back in the days. Welcome, and thank you so much for being here. All the way from Canada.
From Canada, yeah.
Yeah, no, thank you. And last but not least, we have Taylor Heitzig Rhodes. So she works over at Evolved Talent Agency and is the head talent manager. So thanks for rounding out the panel, guys. So I just want to actually give the floor to you guys and have you guys, I introduced you guys a little bit and just gave you the rundown of who you guys are, but I want to give you guys the opportunity to tell everybody a little bit about how you got into the esports space and where you got started from. So I'll start with you, Bryce.
Sure. So I've been in the esports space for over 6 years now, which is crazy. Time flies. I like to say that I fell into it and then I ran with it. So I also started at a quote unquote normal law firm like Ryan. Right. I was not going to be an esports lawyer. I was a general commercial litigator. And one of the things they make junior associates at law firms do is populate the blogs, because no one wants to write for law firm blogs because no one reads law firm blogs. So it's kind of a pointless exercise. And so I was like, all right, well, if you're going to give me a pointless exercise, I'll at least write about something that's interesting to me. I was a burgeoning esports fan and long-time gamer and sports fan. And so I said, okay, I'll write something about esports and the law. This was back in 2013. I turned a 500-word e-alert that went out to our clients into a white paper that floated to the top of the League of Legends subreddit, and kind of the rest was history. That white paper became a series of white papers. I adopted the handle Esports Law on Reddit and on Twitter. I posted a lot of things on a lot of different gaming and esports related legal topics, and it kind of all snowballed out. So before I knew it, fast forward a year and a half, and most of my practice was actually doing esports transactional work, not doing commercial litigation anymore. And so I left, co-founded an entertainment law firm boutique with my mentor. And then about a year and a half after that, I left and founded ESG, where I still practice this day, along with 5 other incredible attorneys. So yeah, I don't know. It's I was the first to market esports attorney, right? And no one can ever take that away from me, even if everyone else does it better from here on out.
Yeah, no, thank you. I was really excited to have Bryce here because he does give a little bit of a different perspective, since he does mainly represent teams and orgs versus the player side. So I'm excited to hear the conversation we're going to have today. What about you, Ryan?
So similar to Bryce, I was headed towards becoming a commercial litigator. I clerked for a federal judge, and then I interviewed with a good North Carolina firm. And when I interviewed with them, they asked me, if you could do anything, what would you do? And I was really interested in esports, and so I talked about esports. Everybody said, I have no idea what that is, but you're throwing out some really interesting numbers with the growth and prize pools and things like that. And about a year in, my daughter was born. I had some time off, and so I decided to try to see if I could figure out a way to do this. I had one contact in the space, said, can you connect me to literally anybody? If I can get my hands on the contracts and figure them out, I'm sure I can do this stuff. And actually, probably the third person I met in the space was Bryce, negotiating the first contract I got my hands on. And I think Bryce was like, okay, like, the kid sort of knows what he's doing. Like, he seems nice enough. Like, he's not gonna...
I think you're older than me, but
yeah, no, that's like, yeah, kid, esports kid.
Yeah,
So I'm coming up on 3 years doing this. Largely have done player side work, although a little bit of everything at this point. And Bryce, set off and did his own thing, but I think firms have figured out at this point that, hey, this is a real thing and can be done. And so whereas Bryce may not have had the complete support he needed at that firm, I've been able to maintain that.
Yeah, just to jump in on that point really quickly, it's worth noting that just like, esports evolving in doggy years, right? If Ryan's doing this in 2017, 2018, he can point to sold out stadiums and franchise leagues where people are paying tens of millions of dollars and all this kind of stuff. Whereas I had to go to all of these gray-haired partners and say, the writing is on the wall, this will happen, but it wasn't happening yet, really. I mean, there were, League of Legends World Championships held at the Staples Center. That was a really big deal. I got to show them that, but not nearly as many kind of external markers of success as we have today to legitimize the industry and make everyone interested in kind of buying it and supporting.
Yeah. No, 100%. Marcel?
Yeah, I've been in this whole esports thing, or interested in, like, since 2003 and 4. I think I started out when I was 14 with my first title, Counter-Strike. Have been playing professionally for, I think, 8 years, and most notably for League of Legends. 2015 was when I retired. I never officially retired, but it was my last game on stage. And then I decided to just help out some of my friends. I mean, I just weirdly just jumped into this whole talent representation side of things because I tried to help out friends, and I learned a thing or two, especially from Bryce. I mean, I met him very, very early on. I think we met in the EG house or something, right?
Yeah, he's talking about his most prodigious professional playing career, leaving out the fact that he actually carried me in some solo queue games, which is probably the hardest task he's accomplished as a player.
I still remember that game very well. But
yes.
Yeah, I've been doing talent representation for like 5 years now. Was at one of the larger entertainment companies last year, where part of my agency that I was part of got acquired by them, which I left last year. And now I'm just working independently, doing my own thing again, just working with people that I like to work with, some good friends of mine, and yeah, that's how this whole thing came about.
Yeah, I actually have a question now that I thought about it. And you don't have to go into specifics, but what do you think of the new EG logo?
Me?
Yeah.
I think there's a lot of people that didn't really like it. And
it's a lawyer answer.
Yeah, there's a lot of people that didn't like it. I mean, personally, I think the rebranding was kind of weak, probably, but that's pretty common, like amongst other people. They used a very iconic logo and kind of took it away from them. So for me, EG now is no longer what it stands for, like what it stand for like years ago, right? It was such an iconic brand, if not like the iconic brand, and it feels a bit saddening to see that. But yeah, maybe they will change it again. I hope so. I mean, I hope they will bring the iconic crest back. I think that was always EG.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm already talking too much, so I hate to interject again and disrupt the flow. But since EG is a client, I feel like if I don't say something, Phil or Nicole are watching, I get in trouble. So let me just to throw out the 2 cents. I think that the public outcry was disproportionate to the actual like objective quality of the logo. Like people treated it like it was like a child had touched it like it was a trash fire, right? And I get that the memes were fun, but that's not really what's going on. What's going on is like a disconnect between what Marcel was saying, like the old guard legacy of EG and not appropriately communicating or paying homage to some of those variables. It wasn't like the new brand in a vacuum was disastrous. It was more kind of reflective of some of the actual strengths of EG, that like they have this old impassioned community who deeply cares about this. There are so many esports teams that could change their logo to a cartoon drawing tomorrow and that would not wind up with the type of outcry EG had, because so many people like deeply care about the brand. So just to quickly throw that out there.
Yeah, not saying anything negative about EG at all. I was just wondering, since you were in the esports scene, especially in the league scene back when EG, the old iteration of EG was there. So I do want to get your take. But yeah, thank you. What about you, Taylor? What's your story?
Yeah. So I was trying to remember while everyone else was talking about which Worlds for League of Legends.
2014.
There it is. 2014. Thank you, Marcel. So I fell in love with League in 2014 and was really interested, I guess, mostly as a fan for a while. And when I moved to California, I initially worked, I was working at a company called Headspace, which is an app that teaches people how to meditate. And I built and launched an esports program for them while I worked there, similar to Ryan and Bryce. I was working somewhere that didn't know about esports. I was a person who never, ever shut up about it. And so I built and launched an initiative. And while we were trying to work out if and how they would support that initiative long term, I had the opportunity to join Evolved. And I had been looking for a long time for the right opportunity for me, and I just felt like it was knocking at my door, so to speak. And so I joined, and then I was the head talent manager, and I am now an agent myself.
Okay, perfect. Well, how's everybody been in quarantine? I mean, I think we were talking about this a little bit before the stream started, but the impression of esports in quarantine is, from the outside perspective, everyone's like, well, you guys are online all the time anyway, so like, how is this affecting you? But it is affecting us. It's affecting you guys, especially in your own respective deals that you guys are having right now, and obviously not getting into specifics, but talk to me a little bit about how that's been going and what challenges you've had to face in such a interesting time for just esports in general and the world.
I mean, I think it's easy to say that, it's not affecting our industry because, creators or streamers are working from home and a lot of the space is digital, but the truth is that, there's been a viewership increase in terms of like how many eyes are on our space, but that hasn't necessarily yet translated into like greater financial opportunity. And so I think, there are teams or brands that are having a harder time, and so the impacts are sort of in places we might not expect and are sort of, at least for me, it seems like some companies or some brands or some teams seem like they've been really heavily impacted and other parts of the business seem like relatively untouched. And it's been really interesting to see like how it develops and who is being affected by what and when.
Yeah, if I could add to that, NASCAR and the NBA and other sort of esports, traditional sports esports, are the ones who've really seen the upswing. So, NASCAR teams who all of a sudden have this find, they've just found money lying on the ground with their main event sort of off to the side. They're the ones who I think are seeing a lot of uptick, plus the creators, the influencers, the streamers. But it's damaged other spaces. I mean, there have been a lot of workers let go at different levels in esports. And the other thing that I've seen is investment money has sort of dried up. A lot of investors are very cautious right now, and they're being very careful about which ventures they might use their money in. And with some teams who raised several years ago coming up on, sort of their runway, they may be finding it harder to find more dollars.
Yeah, no, I agree. I think from a commercial standpoint, a lot of advertisement dollars have dried up in that sense. Even working on the influencer and content creation side, I've seen like a lot of agencies are kind of drying up and are not doing anything right now until this whole thing resolves. And then for me specifically with some of the players, I mean, cut salaries are basically the thing that is happening over in Europe, that some teams applaud to their players to basically take less money for like 2 or 3 months until this whole thing resolves, so they can kind of bridge the gap and don't have to let go of some workers. So I think some teams are definitely trying to figure it out to navigate this whole thing the best they can. But yeah, as Ryan mentioned, the runway for like a lot of these teams is coming up, and I think a lot of us knew that this winter, the esports winter, is coming because it was on the writing. This whole pandemic and crisis thing has just accelerated it. So we're kind of now where we could have been in like 1 or 2 years when the runway is actually up. But I think Bryce can probably talk a bit more about the team side of things, how that's going to be impacted, and how teams are doing right now.
Yeah, I mean, I think from a macro perspective, the esports industry is it's not unaffected. Everyone's affected, right? But it is more resilient to this particular set of challenges than many other industries, particularly many other forms of entertainment. And so, while we are harmed far less than, for example, our traditional sports counterparts who literally cannot continue to operate, right? Like they cannot put butts in stadiums, they cannot even play the games, right? And that'll change eventually. Like I'm sure there will be phased plans where the games start to occur again and things like that. But like in this large period of time we've already had, like esports is the only sports, right, that are happening. And so because the show can go on, like a lot of the business can go on, people are watching, as Taylor was saying, like eyeballs are up in a number of different places. It's not a macro, it's not like everywhere in esports is feeling the increase. There are some sports games, like Ryan was saying, that are feeling the increase. Counter-Strike has seen a big increase. Obviously Valorant content is getting consumed at like pretty insane levels. So there are some, quote unquote winners, right, as a result of this. There is a macroeconomic dynamic, right? When Marcel's asking about like how the teams are doing, obviously I'm not going to speak to any individual team's circumstances, but teams like many esports related businesses that are not game publishers are largely startups. Some of them are more established startups that have been around for 5+ years, or some of them, like Team Liquid's been around for much longer than that, right? Like 20 years. As a real business, though, not that long, right? A decade. And as a business that's been raising money, less than that. And so they're all in kind of business terms definitely still startups. Many of them are, and teams make no secret of the fact that like they tend not to be cash flow positive, right? There are exceptions that prove the rule, but right now they're still in startup growth mode, which means you rely on capital raises for financing. Some organizations have closed rounds recently, have a lot of money in the bank. Others of them that were getting ready to go into a raise cycle now have to do that in a more economically turbulent time than they otherwise would have dealt with 5 months ago, right? Like if you look at what's happening with the stock market, if you look at what's happening with the real estate landscape, like it, if you look at, by the way, like trends of private investment deals, like it's all down, right? People don't know what's going to happen. And so people are less inclined to invest money into these types of ventures because they want to basically keep their money safe and figure out what's going to happen and then go back and deploy capital. That's not to say that it's impossible to raise money. It's not to say that like all teams that need to raise money are going to fail or anything like that. Far from it. But it is a more challenging time to raise money than it otherwise would be. And similarly, right, like as Taylor was saying, with people not like, if you're a brand and you're trying to figure out what to do, right, and you're trying to, first of all, depending on what brand you are, your business might be really struggling right now, right? Some brands are in a position where it's like, okay, things are up, right? If you're Comcast or whoever, right? There are some brands that are getting a lot more usage right now, right? Maybe Zoom will start sponsoring esports, who knows, right? But there are a lot of brands that their business is really struggling, so the notion of deploying sponsorship dollars is tough pill to swallow. And even for the brands that aren't struggling, it's still a somewhat challenging environment to decide you want to be spending, non-essential money, right? It's not, you're not employing your workers, you're not keeping your business alive, you're advertising for your business, and that's a more challenging environment. So yeah, I mean, it's affecting us. It's definitely affecting us. It's affecting every industry. But it is nice, right, that we are a more resilient space and that we're able to kind of take advantage of some of the opportunities that have been presented.
Yeah, even being on the partnership side at a smaller company like Invent Global, like me reaching out to people, it's been it's definitely been a struggle. Yeah, because they're just saying like, well, is there going to be the success that's already shown? Like it's a big toss up everywhere.
Yeah.
And so for everyone, it's like brands aren't willing, not all brands, but a lot of brands aren't willing to actually throw in that kind of just like throw out the fish hook and like hope that they get something in. It's more like, yeah, they want the safety. So I completely understand that. And is there any companies that you guys have seen, like genre wise, I guess you could say, that you feel are benefiting right now and that you've seen more outreach from for your clients? If you can say that.
Yeah, I don't know how much I can talk about the conversations I've had, but definitely
say that.
Okay. Yeah, I was just like, like stuff like Zoom, like that would be a great example. Like if there was something like, video conferencing companies that have been like, hey, like we're actually interested there. But yeah, I mean, I think it's a strange world. I think adapting, especially on the partnerships side, on the brand side, like I don't think any of us specifically deal with brand deals. And if you guys do, then I'm totally wrong. But
I do, for what's worth. I mean, we do
yeah.
on the legal side, right? We're not sourcing the brand deals.
Yeah.
And also on the consulting, I mean, I've only talked about my legal hat, but on the consulting hat, I've done a bunch of consulting with brands over the years. I mean, it's worth noting that brand deals tend to be long-tailed deals, which I mean, there's a much larger kind of time horizon required to source, educate, negotiate, strategize, and implement. You know, but there are a lot of brands right now that historically deployed a lot of capital for advertising in other ways that are now like seeing all those other ways not available to them and are probably becoming aware of gaming and esports at a much different level. So I'm also not going to comment on any active deals, right, for obvious reasons, but I do think there will be a real lasting impact that comes from this for the number of people who are getting exposed to this type of content and might see an opportunity that doesn't actually follow through and really get announced for 6-12 months, but really did originate because of these circumstances.
Yeah. Well, shifting away from stuff we can't talk about, let's talk about some stuff that we can talk about, we can discuss. Obviously, you guys still are representing players. Life is still going on, thank God, in the esports world. We're still seeing tournaments, we're still seeing seasons go on, even if they are delayed, if they are, modified a little bit, like Overwatch, you don't get all the traveling that was planned for it, which I was really excited for, but, there will always be another year, hopefully, praying that everything will return back to normal. But yeah, players still need to be represented. New talent needs to be represented. And something that I think is huge right now is the fact that Valorant has busted onto the scene. And we just saw Sinatra come over to the Sentinels from Overwatch, and that was a huge deal that kind of happened. And from what I know, there's just not going to be a competitive Valorant scene for like another year. But we're already seeing players getting signed to these Valorant teams and building things up from there. What are your guys' thoughts on this new game and what it means for the other shooter games that are out there?
I think it's pretty obvious that this is a much larger problem in the esports system, right? That one game can come out and completely take away teams, players, casters, and whatever. We have seen it multiple times, and I think Valorant is no stranger to that. And I think it's just players, if you have to play like 12 hours a day, 14 hours a day, you gotta make sure that you play a game that you actually really enjoy playing. I can talk about that from personal experience, that eventually after like a long time you get fed up with the game, or the game is in such a bad state that it actually doesn't really benefit you anymore to play, and you're just kind of burned out from it. Just playing the game, it feels like a dread. So I think a lot of players are kind of getting into that mindset right now, where something new is coming out, something super exciting is there, there's a new ecosystem, and teams are positioning, they want to place their chips basically early on to make sure that they are in those conversations with like Riot Games and whatnot. But I think I think Valorant obviously like a big splash, and even though there's no tournament, no esports ecosystem right now, there's tournaments happening. Like it's very grassroots. I think it's also with intent that we all gonna build this thing together. There's multiple teams kind of shifting into like the TO role right now. We've seen like G2, T1 all hosting tournaments without jumping the gun to sign a team. And I'm sure we have all heard of these insane headlines that some players are being paid far too much money for a non-existing ecosystem. But at the same time, it's eyeballs, right? It's headlines. You want to make sure to get a head start. You want to have a really good team. And I can't blame teams, because if you would have to make a decision right now to kind of allocate your dollars, would you rather spend it on like tier 2 Overwatch, or would you just say, hey, I think it makes more sense to just go into like a new game where we can be there from the start, and maybe we're getting lucky, maybe we have a good roster, maybe we get like a lot more eyeballs on that. So I think teams are kind of taking like a very different approach, and you see many teams are very hands-off, and they say, hey, we're not going to invest any money into it because it doesn't make any sense at this current time. And then you see other teams completely jumping into it and like blowing like a lot of money on those salaries. But yeah, I can see both approaches. I think if you are there early and you get a head start, it's very beneficial. As an example, I think if you look at what TSM has done, when they pivoted into Fortnite, they got in very, very early, and they got super lucky with the uptick. And they had like a lot of the big creators, right? You want to be in that position where you ride up the wave. You don't want to buy in when it's like already at the peak, kind of what other esports have done. So it's very difficult to say where this whole thing is going, but I think both sides have a valid point to say, hey, we're gonna wait until the esports system is out, sure. And people who are jumping the gun right now, I can totally understand, based on what I've seen in the past is happening, that they're just wanna be involved right from day one.
Yeah. And as a, sorry, just real quick, I did want to ask, as a player, because, you know, we did see, if you do follow Marcel on Twitter, like, he just hit Immortal in Valorant. So as a player, taking apart the whole talent agent side of it, what do you think of the game on that level? Like, do you think it's something that is going to make a splash in the esports scene, or do you think that, at least where it's at right now, it might be one of those esports that is super big for a year or two and then trickles out?
Yeah, I found the best approach for myself and my work is I kind of need to know exactly what is going on, and I've played at such a high level in so many games that the best way for me to get informed about the game and know every ins and outs and potentially about talent scouting is just I play the game myself and see what kind of talent is out there. It's still very early, so yeah, for me, just grinding it out right now will have a lot of benefits later on when I fully understand the game and don't have to rely on other people telling me. But that's just personal experience. I mean, I don't think anyone else is just grinding out. I'm not even grinding out the game, but just getting every bit of, like, just getting the ropes of it to see how much potential is there. And yeah. I think the game potentially has potential to be bigger than Counter-Strike on a global level. That is, if Asia really picks it up. But yeah, Counter-Strike is not going away anytime soon. It's going to stay. If anything, we're going to have like kind of like similar relationship between Counter-Strike and Valorant that we have between Dota and League of Legends, if that makes sense, right? Yeah. We have both coexisting, both have their own thing. And yeah, I think it has a lot of potential. I think it's going to be here for like a long time. And I think it could be the next big thing, but I don't know how it's gonna look like. It also depends on Riot, what they are doing with it. Yeah.
Taylor, you got something to say?
Yeah, I was gonna say, just piggybacking on what Marcel was saying, I think when we see the let's say the cream of the crop in Overwatch League, a lot of the really talented competitive Fortnite players, when we see really talented FPS players who are in the games that like were the hotness, like as they're moving to Valorant, I think I'm echoing a ton of stuff that Marcel just said, but I think, for teams it's a really challenging position because we don't know how the esports scene is going to develop, but if you don't move now, then you're going to be stuck with whatever wasn't everyone's first choice, right? Like I think a lot of people have a really similar strategy or similar ideas about how to approach it as a developing esport. And it's a tricky position for the teams because it's like, maybe people are overpaying for talent and maybe they're underpaying. If it explodes and in a year, those numbers are going to look different, then the teams who didn't get in now are going to be like, man, I wish we would have signed somebody a year ago and everybody was so cheap, or so much cheaper than they are now. I think that Riot has shown really incredible ability to like support or create an esports scene that has legs and longevity. And so between the way that they've addressed sort of the weaknesses of Counter-Strike from like a branding or I guess a branding perspective with Counter-Strike, right? Like it's so hard to sell brands on Counter-Strike, no matter how great it is, and having something that can be really similar, but that addresses those needs, that also is new, that's out from a publisher. You know what I mean? Like I feel like they're putting so many things together in the right way. Like it's really, really exciting to see what's going to happen with it.
I think Valorant sort of summarizes a number of the aspects of esports that are either challenges or just attributes of it. First, I mean, my first law of esports is the community decides what an esport is, not the publisher. So you see how many people are playing Valorant, and that right there is an indication of this is a good, popular, fun game. And if people keep playing it, it will become an esport. If they stop playing it, then it will stop being an esport or won't become an esport. It shows another big challenge, which is traditional sports. You have sort of your big four, right? You have hockey, NBA, baseball, for whatever it's worth, NFL, and then you have other sports that go around it as well. But those have been around for decades, sometimes over 100 years in the case of baseball. With esports, because video games can come out so frequently and disrupt the entire market, and because we expect that, this is one of the big challenges, that until you get something that is really difficult to replicate and entrenches itself, like, you know, Dota and League being MOBAs, really hard to replicate that. First-person shooters generally not that hard to replicate, which is why you have, you know, 500 battle royales come out and everybody attempting to do their battle royale and distinguish it. Valorant's showing that as well. Is, you know, there's another game that can come out and disrupt things. Another thing I'm seeing is content is king, right? Like Valorant breaking records for people watching it. Like, this space is ultimately an entertainment and content space, and if you're going to thrive in it, you need to be able to get people watching that content, and it's showing that as well. So there are a bunch of other ways that I think add up as well, but those are the three ones that jumped out to me immediately.
Yeah, actually, I did want to ask you guys because it was a hot topic that was discussed, I think, in the last couple of weeks, and it was the whole question about the drops enabled that Riot implemented on their streams. Do you guys have an opinion on what you thought on the standpoint of the publishing side and how that kind of created the hype for it, and especially for like some of the streamers that you guys probably represent that do stream Valorant, if that was a good move by them, or what your thoughts were kind of going forward there, especially in terms of the other esports and how that might affect other games and their releases.
Seems like Taylor.
Yeah. I don't know. I don't want to go
first. I'll go first. So I think one of the things that's going on right now and not getting discussed very much online, but is something fascinating that I've been following for the last 2 years, is the evolution of how games are launched. And there was an old world model that basically everyone followed, which is you build an expensive game trailer, you announce at one of the big gaming events, right? E3 was essentially established for this purpose. You had things like GDC and Gamescom where there were also major releases. You know, some publishers like Blizzard would break the mold and they would create BlizzCon and they would, you know, create their own marquee event for it. And what we've seen is as influencers have risen in popularity, and as we now live in a world in which there's not just one like PewDiePie who's light years ahead of every other gaming influencer. You have dozens of them, right? Like, and they are household names like Ninja, or at least gaming household names like Dr. Disrespect and Tim the Tatman and Shroud and Lyric and Summit and so on, you know, so on and so forth, right? XQC, etc. We could do the whole litany. I'm not trying to offend any of you. If I did not list a client, I apologize. I'm sure all of your clients belong on that list. But the core point I'm making is that, like, as influencers have risen in prominence, it has really shaken up this ecosystem. And I think Apex was actually the first moment in which you had like a massive drop that was cloaked in influencers, right? And it wasn't about the game trailer, although they had one and they ran advertisements and all that stuff. It was much more about making a massive live streaming based splash, right? And the enormous success that Apex saw out of the gates, right? I mean, I think Apex is still a great game, was a great game. I think they probably were underprepared for the level of success that they were going to have with that game so quickly, and I think that affected where it's at from a popularity perspective now. But the launch strategy was very smart and relatively original when you put it in the grand scheme of things, right? There have been other games launched this way, but not AAA titles with this type of investment. And then we've seen an ongoing shift in this, right? Like when you look at what Riot Games did for its 10-year anniversary, you know, planning basically an hour where the gaming world stops and tunes into a live stream for announcements. It's like taking the BlizzCon opening ceremony, but instead of wrapping it around a massive physical event, they said we can just do one big digital splash and it's going to be amazing. And then if you look at the way in which they've rolled out the, you know, alpha and then beta of Valorant, like we're heading in a similar direction where they're continuing to break new ground of what does it look like to launch a game. They're deploying capital differently. They're engaging with their community differently by creating this, you know, incentive that, like the drops, right? You're talking about, Kelsey, is a very interesting strategy where they're saying, we want our people who are investing so much time in watching this content on Twitch, who really desperately want to play, we want to give them a shot to play. So let's create a symbiotic relationship where if you're going to be obsessed with this, if you're going to be deeply passionate about the idea of Valorant, we want you to have access. And if you're like someone who might play an hour of Valorant or whatever, you're far less likely to have gotten the key because you didn't invest the hours right, in consuming the content, learning about the game. So people were building up a passion for playing the game before ever getting access, and they get access and they play and they're so invested already. It's a really interesting dynamic and new model. I'll be honest with you, I think we've only begun to scratch the surface of what launching games looks like in 2020 and moving forward. I think Apex was really successful. I think Valorant was really successful. And I think we're going to see a lot of publishers go to school on these strategies and continue to forge their own paths, because the old world model, while it worked, I don't think was actually optimized for the power of influencers in the modern market.
Well, and
Bryce, I was going to ask a follow-up.
I was going to say before we go to follow-up that I think the drops are so smart because it incentivizes the creators in such a brilliant way to like bring people's interests together. Like Riot wants people to watch the streams. People who are streaming it want people to watch the streams, and then it's a way to have like everyone win. Like it's such an elegant solution.
I agree.
It lifts all,
What were you saying, Ryan?
lifts all boats, right?
Exactly.
Yeah, so follow up, do you think that is one of the reasons the success of some of these influencer marketing pushes is another one of the reasons that E3 is looking at just not being around anymore, or just being in a digital format? I mean, I know that that was compounded by the pandemic, but there were already rumors floating around about that happening.
Yeah, I mean, at the end of the day, a conference like E3 relies on massive publishers and brands that follow the publishers, spending a lot of money on these huge booths and physical activations. And if slowly but surely the folks historically who would have spent money at a conference like E3, right? It's all of the big publishers. The EAs of the world would have launched Apex there. Riot would have launched Valorant there. Like Blizzard would have launched Overwatch there. That didn't happen. And as more and more AAA publishers were saying, we can find another path that doesn't involve, that reaches our audience in a way we think it's going to be more effective, right? That we think it's better bang for our buck, or whatever it is. I never launched a game at E3, so I never went through the exercise of like, how expensive is that? What does the ROI look like, right? Like, so I can't compare, right, what would have happened if Riot launched Valorant at E3 versus launching it on their own in the way that they have. All I can say is, we see the trend, which is a lot of these big publishers choosing to go a different route. And if that's a trend, and then E3's core value proposition is in jeopardy, and so it kind of all makes sense. This is a meaningful amount of educated guessing. It's pretty educated, but I'm definitely guessing, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, definitely. On the player side of things too, because it's such a new kind of groundbreaking, or not a groundbreaking, but just like it's a weird time. Obviously, everyone's in this like a weird lull. But when you're scouting new players that you want to sign, or even with teams deciding if they should sign a Valorant team, what are kind of the prerequisites that you look at, or where do you source these players from, or where do you think that people should be looking? Because obviously, I have a lot of friends that just in my personal life are trying to rank up, trying to get Valorant and see if, it's their shot to become pro. But I don't know if that's necessarily the best place to look for talent. If it's, finding someone like Sinatra, who is from Overwatch, from other shooting games, and bring them over here. Or if we want to invest in new people, new streamers. What's your guys' opinions? And where have you guys seen some of the draw coming from?
I think the best. I think right now we are just we just have to basically look at CS:GO and look at it and say, hey, what worked for CS:GO and what regions are like really diving into it. Mm-hmm. Right now, in the last couple of days, I've seen a huge uptick in like Brazilian streamers, people that are going crazy in Brazil. They just opened up the Korean beta as well, so we have to see what Korea is doing. So I think, if history has taught us anything, it's probably that Brazil is probably getting like massive fan bases, while at the same time being economically like very underdeveloped compared to like something like North America, which means that teams can basically look at the Brazilian region and say, hey, this is like all the eyeballs we get for significantly less money probably than as opposed to like signing someone like Sinatra, right, who's like a North American superstar and MVP. But yeah, if anything has taught us, then maybe Europeans are going to be the best at Valorant because they are the best at Counter-Strike. Like from me, what I'm looking at right now is if the Danes and the Swedes are getting into like the Nordic countries, they have lived and breathed basically Counter-Strike and FPS for like the last 20 years. And everything, all this LAN culture and everything has started there. So if they give me a sign that, hey, we're going to invest a significant amount of time to actually get good at Valorant, then I think it's a very positive sign, and I'm going to probably look at that. But yeah, scouting players right now, I think all these, with the ecosystem being so influencer focused, it's kind of becoming like influencer invitational. So a lot of people are sourcing their talent from these tournaments that are being like hosted by several teams and everything. And we don't even have KPIs yet, so there's no leaderboard, there's nothing. We can't really measure how good a player really is. I think it's really hard right now. You're just making a judgment call. You say, hey, based on past performances, player might be likely to succeed, without even knowing if he's going to be good at it. So it might be fairly like too early right now, right? And then you have all these Fortnite kids, basically like the 14, 15-year-olds that grew up over the last 2-3 years that are now looking to enter like a new esport, kind of like a more adult one, if that makes sense. They might actually switch to Valorant, right? That has impact. So I don't really know. I can't tell for sure because we don't really have that much information to really know what's going on. And yeah, the scene is going to look massively different in a year from now on than what it looks right now, for sure.
Yeah. Does anyone else have any comments on that? Or like, it doesn't have to be Valorant, just like with games in general, when they come up, like Apex made a resurgence of it, or not a resurgence, but just an upsurgence in the past couple of years. When you're looking for talent like that, because I mean, I'm sure there's streamers right now watching. I'm sure there's players that do want to get involved in the pro scene, but it's a big toss up. I mean, I think when I got into esports a couple of years ago, I would be doing stuff at my college, UCSB, and like I would get people that say like, oh yeah, like I want to be a pro, like do you have any advice or know anyone that like can give me advice on that? And the first answer that always came to my mind was like, don't bank on that. And with a new game, or a new game based off other games and stuff like that, is it smart for these new streamers, if they're maybe probably like Valorant kind of rank, or like top rank, but not someone that is like top of the leaderboards, like rank 1, rank 2, is it smart to invest their time here? Like, what advice can you give these people who think they want to have a chance? Is there anything that you would say to them?
Get good at creating content more than like in this space, I hear influencers need like 3 things to really be a big streamer. You need to be good at the game, you need to be entertaining, and you need to like have some sort of educational aspect. And you need also, 4th thing, you need sort of a brand as well. You need, who's your target market, how are you creating your brand? But I think really if you can create good and entertaining content, and there's so many outlets for that. TikTok is, basically the latest iteration, but if you have good Twitter content, if you have good YouTube content that you can do, a lot of the reasons that the compilations of some of these streamers is so good is because they play so much, they can grab the good bits, put it into content, make that. So if you can be a good content creator, I think that's more important than necessarily being like the best at the game. You could be good at the game, good enough at the game, but if you can create content, that's more important.
Yeah. And I think that brings up... Go ahead.
I was going to say, I think that is like a much wider path forward, right? Like if the esports scene develops to the point like a Counter-Strike, like a League of Legends, like the way to get involved will be to be one of the best in the world, and that's like an incredibly small group of people. But the way forward for everyone else is exactly what Ryan is saying, being able to like figure out who your audience is, figure out how to connect to them, figure out what to make with the time that you're spending like gaming and streaming, that builds your audience, that grows your brand. And that is, I think that's exactly the advice that I would give is, start streaming, build a brand, get a Twitter, like start a YouTube channel before you think you need one. Like the more you can spread out the ways that you could be amassing a following, the more likely you are to figure out what works best for you and who you are and what you like. And then, as you grow in those directions, it'll be easy to develop as an influencer, as a content creator.
Yeah, and I think that brings up like a really important idea of being marketable. You guys represent teams and players, and I did want to ask, if you have a player that you rep that is super talented. Obviously, everyone knows their name and whatnot, but they're not marketable. How do you, or even like a team, like a new team that's coming up from the ground and is like, Bryce, I need some help. Like, can you help me out? How do you, or what's the advice that you give to them to make them marketable? If, I don't even want to say it, but it's just like, some people, they just like, they need to, like, you really need to dig in them to get like some marketability or personality out sometimes. Like, not saying that's a bad thing, but sometimes that's just the facts. So as agents, as managers, as representatives, what's your tactic to make these players marketable to brands or to teams to help get them success?
Yeah, I think that's a big challenge, and I think many teams are struggling exactly with that issue, that most of their players might be really good at the game, but they're just simply not marketable. And the problem there is intrinsically, right? They need to want it from themselves, because if you just force them to do it, the content is going to be bad, it's going to be salty, or they are just going to be forced to do it. And from my experience, it's so hard to actually force it on players. I mean, if the players really doesn't want to do it, then there's not much you can do. Like, some people just want to be good at the game. They just want to play and express themselves in the game through competition, and that's fine. But at the same time, we shouldn't be forcing those pro players to make all these kind of things, because, to be honest, they got there where they are because they're good. They're good at the game. They're good in a team play, but not because they know how to work with brands. And most of them sadly don't. And we have made some good steps for like media training and all these kind of things over like the past years. But at the same time, it's just from what I'm seeing, it's like if a player is not really super into it in the first year or something, and when he develops, then chances are he's not going to care about all of this stuff 5-6 years down the road. And then you probably have to go with the players that actually want to make an effort, that want to build a brand. I always tell my people that I work with, you need to think about the future, right? Content creation, being a brand, making sure that you are attractive to like these kind of things. It doesn't give you any result right now. It will be a very big ROI later on in your career, like 3, 4, 5 years from now on. And that's what I'm working with, right? For me, for like retired players, they often come to me and say, hey, like, I don't know what I'm doing. I don't want to go back to school. Like, do you have any advice for me? And sadly, it's going to be too late by then, right? Once the career ends, once you can no longer play, that's it. Like, you are completely on your own feet. And what I try to tell them is, hey, like, start a YouTube channel, start Instagram, like, try at least. If you really don't like it, then that's fine. But if you want to continue working in this industry, or like want to be part of this community, then you need to find ways to basically make yourself accessible and make sure that people can follow you, what you're up to, right? But yeah, sad reality is that most players, I think 90% of pro players probably don't care. So yeah, I don't know how to solve this. It's just something that also teams are struggling with. If players are not wanting to do the effort or wanting to do the extra length and give that extra interview, there's many of them that don't want to do it. And yeah, I'm certainly not the one that's going to force them to do it, right? It needs to come from themselves, I think.
Yeah, no, I had the panel that we held last week that I also moderated was on social media, and I had a bunch of representatives from orgs, and that was their biggest complaint. They all were just like, use your content, like, use your social medias, because that's, it's a huge marketing tool, and I think it's so underutilized by so many players. And yeah, like you were saying, Marcel, I think there's a lot of teams that try to get content from their players, and they will sit them all in a room and make them do something that they don't necessarily want to do, and it's so visible. And you can't make this up. Like, they got to actually enjoy what they're doing. And I think, yeah, that's great advice, especially for players that, want to get out there. Like, you got to be marketable, and you got to have a selling point, or else why is someone going to pick you up, Yeah. Especially for longevity.
Yeah, I think,
Well,
go for Taylor.
I was going to say, when we think about all of those players that Bryce named, everybody who's at the top of Twitch, not a single one of those people is a current competitive player, right? They're all extremely good at the games that they play, but what they're providing those audiences, one, is like extensive use of those marketing platforms and tools. All of them are content powerhouses. I don't know about every single one of them, but I think that every single one of them also has a team, which is one of the things that I was going to say that we recommend is, like, if you hate making content and like posting on your Twitter and making a YouTube, then like hire someone to do that stuff. Like, play the footage, make the clips, and just like, but like, you have to get it out somehow.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, so I mean, there are many like many of the people on top of that list, right? The XQCs and Shrouds and Ninjas of the world are former professional players, right? Who transition into content creation as their full-time career. There are tons of pros out there that could go full-time as content creators if they wanted to. They have the skill set, they have the enjoyment level. They just like competing at the highest level. Like the reality of this is, it's just about what you want, right? Like whatever it is that's going to make you happy in life. And like if a player says, listen, I don't want to be a talent, right? Like I want to be a professional player. I'm in this to win. That's all I care about. That's fine. Understand, by the way, that when you do that, you're making a couple choices. One, you're deciding you're worth less right now, right? You are deciding because a player who is more popular is worth more money, right? The two players have completely equal skill at the game, both playing professionally. One of them has 100,000 Twitter followers. One of them has 10,000 Twitter followers. The 100,000 Twitter follower player is getting paid significantly more money, and they should be paid more money, right? That is a logical conclusion for a team to reach. Whenever someone is making an argument with me that like a player's compensation should be solely tied to their results in the like on the server, I'm like that's literally not how economics works. That doesn't make any sense at all. Right? It's it's the same argument that like Kobe, may he rest in peace, right? When there was this controversy that he was taking a max deal in the end of his contract, and because he been with the Lakers so long, it was a huge contract, he wasn't a good enough player to justify that amount of money. And he was like, yeah, but I am a popular enough player to justify that amount of money. I am generating hundreds of millions of dollars for this organization in the form of ticket sales and media rights, and so I will be paid my due, even though as a strictly basketball player, there are other players like I should not make that amount of money, right? And that's correct. That is the way the marketplace should operate. So understand, when you're a player and you're foregoing a desire to build a brand, you are hurting your economic value in the market. You are also limiting what you can do when you are no longer good enough to play professionally, which will happen. No one will play professionally forever. So if you want another path available to you, one path when you finish is to go and be a content creator, streamer, whatever. And if you want to do that, like Marcel said, your time to capitalize is to build your fame while everyone is looking at you. If you wait till you're retired to try to build it, it's not that you can't do it, right? Ninja's popularity grew, I don't know how many thousands of X when he from when he was a professional player to when he retired, but he was starting from somewhere, and that was extremely valuable, right? So there's real implications to all these decisions that all these players, slash content creators are making when they're deciding what they want to prioritize and what they want to do with their lives. I'm not going to tell anyone to do with their life. It's totally up to them. But like, if you want this path, then you need to understand the steps that you have to take to get there and then start doing it.
I think a lot of it gets skewed because in traditional sports, you could just be a good player, at least, several years ago. It might be shifting now. You could just be a good player, and that was that. Like, it used to be you would take Tim Duncan in his prime over KG at the end of his playing career every day, any day. But in this day and age, you might want KG at the end of his career over Tim Duncan in his prime just because you're getting a personality. Tim Duncan has a personality. It's, very staid, calm, but KG is giving you all the content, right? So you might take somebody who's the much better content creator, not as good a player, because that's in the market.
Yeah,
right
I think that's always been true. It's interesting when you're looking at the very top, because when you're at the salary cap level, it kind of doesn't matter, right? Like Tim Duncan. So if there were no salary cap, Tim Duncan in his prime would have been less than would have cost less money than Kevin Garnett in his prime, probably because Kevin Garnett is a more hype player, more likely to put butts in the seats. Like, it probably depends on what team you're at too, by the way, right? Like, if you're a team that struggles to put butts in the seats, you might spend more money on someone who's going to do that. If you're the Lakers or the Knicks and you sell out every game, no matter how awful the organization is, it might affect you less or more. Or maybe you're the Knicks and like the media rights exponential growth value is so great. So I think these decisions actually made all the time. Look at a player look at how much Jeremy Lin cost, for example, right? This is an example of a player whose skill, who was, by the way, a great basketball player. I think people underestimate how good Jeremy Lin was actually in his prime, so let's set that aside. He was getting paid disproportionately larger sums of money because of the audience that he brought with him. He was not a max level player, and so he actually realized that delta. The same as, you see this all the time, by the way, for people towards the end of their careers, where like, how much money Kevin Garnett or Amari Stoudemire or whoever, right? I'm thinking of some of these players that I grew up watching and how much they got paid at the end of their career. It was more because of the name brand value. So I actually do think this has played out in sports, in every sport, basically, since the beginning of sports really becoming like a marketing phenomenon. It's a combination of skill and marketability that dictates compensation.
Yeah, and I think that's a really interesting point to bring up, the relation between what we've seen already proven in traditional sports and how it can translate into esports. And I do think that a lot of teams and managers and just the players in general need to, nail it in the coffin that, this works. This has been proven. This is how people are successful here. And even though it is a different landscape, you can still bring those practices over. And, it's baffling sometimes how people ignore that. And, it's still the discussion like, oh, esports isn't a sport, it doesn't have the same like blueprint and all of that. But it's arguable where it's like, why doesn't it? It's, just because it's developing doesn't mean that it won't one day become what sports is right now. And I do want to pose that question on the law side. It's like I said, it's always a discussion. Traditional sports, esports, they're two different entities, but how can they both, or how can esports level up so that we get to the same position of where traditional sports, both on the law side and then also the just general side of it?
I think there are some fundamental challenges to getting to that point. As I mentioned earlier with Valorant and the disruption that comes with a new game, if you are iterating so quickly on what esports can come out, and if their half-life is far shorter than traditional sports, then it's very difficult to build up the infrastructure to get to a point where you do have an established league that's been around enough where it makes sense to do collective bargaining, to do some of these, to send it all the way down into collegiate and high school levels. We are just beginning to see how long an esport can last. Really, what's our outside window right now? Like, you've got Smash, which is very underdeveloped, but is a great game. And the fact that it's still getting that many devoted people should speak more to it. You've got Counter-Strike, you've got Dota, you've got, League. Yeah, League is probably just, Dota and League came out. Dota 1 was before League, but then League was much more developed.
League's 10-year-old game.
Yeah. So you're starting to see how long games can last, and those games are starting to push forward to that. You've had some attempts at acceleration on that are proving not to be very fruitful, as we're seeing in real time right now.
That was the most vague shot fired I've ever seen.
So I think we really need to wait and see, can an esport last 30 years? If we go 10 more years of some of those games, I do think you'll start to see that maturation, because the other thing I think needs to happen is you need to have the old guard of players going out and helping to mature the scene, some people who are getting involved to help develop the professionalization of the space. You need more development of the collegiate and sort of the talent pipeline coming in as well. And there's a big overarching challenge to that, which is also the publisher. And how much does the publisher help those things? How much does the publisher hinder those things? What is their role? Because they can turn the spigot on and off for virtually any part of that. So there's some real challenges to doing it, is what I'm saying.
Yeah.
And once we overcome those, then we might start to see it.
Yeah, I mean, so I speculated in about the second or third white paper that I wrote about how some of this would play out. It has not played out exactly as I thought yet, but I still think we're heading in that direction, which is I think that this infrastructure gets created at the publisher level for the tier 1A publishers, and I think it becomes fungible across those different titles. And I think they find a way to make the baseline infrastructure, legal infrastructure, business infrastructure that they create around their titles work. And depending on, look, Riot makes no secret of the fact that they want League of Legends to be a generational sport, right? Like in 2050, when we're listening to the biggest sports in the world, they hope we say soccer, basketball, and League of Legends. And they might be able to achieve that goal. We have no idea, right? Time will tell. All these old adages about like the cyclical nature of games, I think, are nonsense based on no data whatsoever, right? And by I think, I mean I know, right? Like here we are 20 years later, Counter-Strike still popular, still peaking out, by the way. Like here we are in quarantine, as some games are not attracting additional audience, and Counter-Strike is attracting massive additional audience and player base. Like it's Counter-Strike. When did Go come out? Like 7 years ago, 8 years ago now? And it just hit its newest concurrent player peak like month over month every month for the last 3 months, right? Which is pretty insane. League of Legends started to dip in popularity, and then they changed the game a little bit. They've changed their strategic thinking about how the game is marketed a little bit, started working more with influencers, like developed, I think, a more cohesive global strategy around what's going on with the game, and it had a resurgence in popularity and viewership around its esports and player base as well. So I think time will tell whether or not these games can actually last indefinitely. I'm of the belief that they probably can't last indefinitely, but I think they probably can last long enough to build up some of this infrastructure, which is not to say Ryan was incorrect. He was right about everything he said. Like, the challenge is you don't know when you have that game until you're pretty far along. And so, like, Fortnite comes out and it's massive. I think it's very unlikely Fortnite is around in 30 years, but I could be wrong. Like, what do I know, right? I'm speculating based on the data available 3 years in. And so, yeah, I mean, it'll be very interesting to see how all of it plays out. But to answer your core question, Kelsey, like, a lot of this has started to happen, right? Like, we've seen the advent of franchise leagues. We have seen the early performing players associations. We have seen, the evolution of kind of a standardized form player contract in the space. A lot of this stuff has started to happen. We're still iterating on it. Everyone's smiling at me.
Yeah, I've got comments.
Yeah, fair enough. Like, the reality is this is all work in progress, right? So it's, where we are today, again, esports evolving in dog years will change a lot over the next 5, 10, 20, 50 years. But you're starting to see us, look to the professional sports world and say, that makes sense, let's grab that. That makes sense, let's grab that. And then also see where it doesn't make sense and, blaze our own path.
Well, I do have a comment on the standard form contract, but I don't know if this is the best forum for it. But I think what Bryce said is correct. And like I said, if we last another 10 years in a particular esport, I do think we'll see a lot of those, especially because given that esports moves in dog years, I mean, we're how far removed from the formation of Players Association, particularly the Counter-Strike Players, Professional Players Association, which still needs to adapt and grow. There's still challenges with having international esports when you have local, jurisdictional labor and employment laws that govern how those work as well. So that adds an extra element of the challenge.
And that's something, like, we can't really look to traditional sports for an answer or even any guidance, because traditional sports don't ever deal with a problem like that.
Yeah.
There are some overarching association of associations.
Yeah, but UEFA and Olympics models, and there's some learning by Taylor's right. There's no sports league, like the Overwatch League, where the finals of the regular league is London versus Philadelphia, right? And there's certainly not a league where the top 20 ranked teams that are playing in the major are from countries all over the world coming together in, wherever the major happens to be for that moment in time. It's a very different dynamic.
Yeah. And all these are great points, and I can't believe it's already 3:00. We sped through that, but I mean, it's so interesting because you guys have so many thoughts and you guys are so well versed in what you do, and the conversation can just constantly keep going. So I don't want to take up too much of your time, but I do want to thank you guys for being out here and giving your input on some of things that are very, very important to me, and something that I love to see. When I first started watching esports way back, when League was in season 2 and season 3, the landscape of it was a lot different, and I'm happy that there are people like each one of you out there helping the players and the teams develop into something that's a lot more prominent and is groundbreaking, I think, in the world right now. So yeah, thank you guys for being here. I did want to give a huge shout out to HyperX for sponsoring this panel today. Thank you so much. And we got awesome headphones, and also their Quadcast mic that I will be using. That's very cool. And so I do want to give a huge shout out to them. And you can find me over at Kelsey Ramage on pretty much every social, Bryce over at Esports Law, Ryan Fairplay Esports, Taylor Tay AFK, and Marcel at Marcel Feldkamp. So yeah, thank you guys so much. Is there anything else you do want to say?
Thanks for having us.
Yeah, thanks Inven, thanks HyperX, thanks Kelsey.
Yeah, of course. And next week we will be having a very special panel with T1. So the CEO of T1, Joe Marsh, will be with us and doing an entire panel with him, moderated by Nick Durazio. And so if you do have any questions, make sure to send them into Inven, and we will be for sure asking him. So thank you guys again, and this is Kelsey signing off. Thanks, guys.
Thank you.
Thanks all.